Welcome back to Hardball. President Trump's story about what he knew about payments to Stormy Daniels has changed a lot of times. Let's watch the changes.
Did you know about the $130,000 payment to Stormy Daniels? Then why did Michael Cohen make it if there was no truth or allegation?
Well, you have to ask Michael Cohen. Michael's my attorney, and you'll have to ask Michael.
Do you know where he got the money to make that payment?
No, I don't know.
Michael would represent me and represent me on some things. He represents me like with this crazy Stormy Daniels deal.
Did you know about the payments?
Later on, I knew. Later on. But you have to understand, Ainsley, what he did, and they weren't taken out of campaign finance. That's a big thing. That's a much bigger thing. Did they come out of the campaign? They didn't come out of the campaign. They came from me.
Well, the Washington Post fact checker, which notes that in the past that they've been hesitant to call Trump's misleading statements lies, concludes that it's now clear that the president's statement on Stormy Daniels was a lie. Let's bring in tonight's Hardball Roundtable. Katty Kay, Washington anchor for BBC News. John Brabender is a Republican strategist, and Jason Johnson is politics editor for TheRoot.com. In that order, Katty first. What do we make of Trump's stories from, he handled the Stormy Daniels thing for me? Well, I didn't even hear about that till later, and it's kind of messy.
So the reason the Washington Post has changed its wording on this is because they're saying now the president knowingly told these mistruths, and therefore it constitutes a lie. Now, critics of the president would say that the press has been far too cautious about this all along, and the people who have done business with Donald Trump in New York over the course of the past few decades will always consistently say that when it comes to negotiations, one of the traits of Donald Trump is that he lies. And critics have called out the press on this and saying this is semantics, and the press actually should have used that word much earlier.
Well, we've had presidents before who have not told all the truth. John Brabender, FDR wasn't exactly forward in his description of his position on England in World War II before the war.
Are you telling me this isn't the first time that an elected official in Washington didn't entirely tell the truth?
I'm only helpful.
But look, there's two arguments there, and you know there's two arguments here. Everybody's going down the path. Did the president lie or not? Well, he might have. It wasn't illegal. There wasn't anything that is something that's going to go to court. There's nothing that affects the Mueller, investigation. You know, this might just be a guy who didn't want his wife to know what he was up to. And so that's our argument. Okay, great. What's that got to do with all the other stuff going on in the world, like creating jobs and nuclear?
His lawyer says that he did it to avoid campaign problems right near the election because he just had access to Hollywood, and this would have tipped the election into impossibility.
Do you believe that, though? How many stories? There was already so many stories like this that didn't tip the election. So why would this one have? I mean, I just think that
because I think they thought they had this much chance to win the election going into it right at the end. People like the smart people in the campaign, including Trump, they had a little bit of chance, and this would have blown.
But you know what? History shows us, it showed us with Bill Clinton that the whole thing with him didn't matter, right? This didn't matter to voters in November of 2016. We're talking about an issue that
all of that makes sense retroactively, right? In the moment, if I am in the campaign war room and someone says they used to talk about the old, I won't even use the word, but the eruptions that they used to talk about with the women and Bill Clinton. Look, you don't often survive those.
Yes. Let me spare you the need.
Yeah.
They called them. We don't have to call them that. They called them bimbo.
They called them bimbo eruptions back in the 90s. This is a porn star eruption. Okay, there's nobody in any war room, in any campaign that would have wanted to run the risk of that getting public.
You're forgetting one other thing that no one wants to talk about with Stormy Daniels. How many of you know that she ran for the United States Senate in Louisiana, being invited by Democrats to do that? She's not exactly number one. My point is, the average person sees this as politics.
No,
they don't.
No, the average person doesn't see. The average person sees politicians cheating as politics. The average person does not see spending $130,000 on
you are making the argument that the president
politics.
made in the Fox News, which is basically, I can do anything I like because the stock market is good. You're saying it's okay if he lied. You're one step away from saying, well, it's okay if
I'm saying what people are judging
campaign finance violation.
Let me go back to John Brabender just to remind you how unfair you guys are about this. If a certain recent president named Obama had involved himself in anything like this near an election, he would have been toast. Anyway, because you guys, late, and maybe he should have been, but late last night, President Trump tweeted that he's asked Secretary of State Mike Pompeo to closely study the South African land and farm seizures and expropriations and the large-scale killing of farmers. They're both connected, of course. Quoting Tucker Carlson's show on Fox last night, he wrote, South African government is now seizing land from white farmers. Well, the South African government responded, tweeted, South Africa totally rejects this narrow perception which only seeks to divide our nation and reminds us of our colonial past. Though South Africa is currently in a political debate over land reform where black South Africans, who make up 80% of the population, still own just 4% of the land, there's no evidence that white farmers are being killed because of their race. John Brabender. I'm sorry, we'll go to Jason Lewis.
Yeah, so this is a white nationalist lie that's been promoted for decades since the end of apartheid. What Ramaphosa is attempting to do is redistribute land, which was denied to black people in that country for almost the last century. This is not an uncommon practice when you have had sort of institutional racism and denial, almost essentially an apartheid state for 100 years. So, but it does strike me that this is the kind of thing that Donald Trump talks about. This is the kind of land and resources he's concerned about, not Jeff Sessions using civil forfeiture, asset forfeiture to take land from Americans, to take resources from Americans. He's concerned about black folks and white folks in South Africa. It tells a lot about what this president actually cares about.
What do you think he cares for, John?
Well, first of all, I don't know why he's entering into this battle, this fight. It's so far off. Well, I know contextually, people who don't like him are going to come up with one reason. People who do like him are going to come up with something else. It's so far off message. It's not relevant to his base, his enemies, or anybody else that it makes no sense to be talking about this.
Except that maybe he feels it is relevant to his base because he is standing up for white farmers.
Let me ask you this, because everybody who says that, define to me who his base is.
For people who have voted for Donald Trump, who feel that there is a threat of immigration excessively and who are fear for their position.
Are they Republicans or Democrats?
I don't think they're necessarily either. I mean, I've met both.
Or both?
But absolutely both.
So probably a lot of Democrats in Rust Belt states, maybe, who put him over the top?
Some Democrats.
Right. And so
we're talking about people who are driven emotionally and voting-wise by notions of white racial grievance. Those are the people who care. That's why he mentions these things.
If people are voting that way, they're wrong, and you're not going to convince me, however, that they are. I believe they're voting on economic issues of their household.
There is no proof of that. There's no, like the economic anxiety argument has never lasted. It is not true. And the president's focus on NFL players and police and law and order is based on the fact that he knows racial grievance works for him.
And now white farmers in South Africa.
But overwhelmingly, most Americans believe we should stand for the flag. It doesn't mean that they want to take anybody's First Amendment rights away.
Right, but the notion that it's racial grievance and that's what drives Trump is what we're talking about.
The roundtable's going to stick with us. I like this because I think it's true, and I think we know what we're talking about here. Up next, these three will tell me something I don't know. You want your hardball.